This is the Unlock Your Inner Creator series, and I'm your host, Noilyn Mendoza. My intention with this series is to spark conversations with passionate changemakers and creatives that bravely dared to dream of new ways and took massive action. Despite the chaos that's happening around us, a radical and liberated future, a new earth can be realized and is possible if we choose to take brave steps. So I invite you to explore with me what that could look like. Here we are. Hi, everyone. Welcome. So excited to have you here. And I just wanted to welcome everybody. We are kicking it off. This is the first official interview of the Unlock Your Creator series. For those that don't know me, my name is Noilyn Mendoza. I'm a transformation coach, leadership consultant, and an energy healer, trained in pranic healing, Reiki, and holographic sound. And I am bringing you this series today by calling in the energy of the spring equinox. And really, when we think about this time, this is a time of renewal and of rebirth, of transformation and transmutation. So I want us to keep that in mind as we get ready to start this interview. And I'm so excited to bring a dear friend and colleague. You know, my intention for these interviews was I am very interested in sparking conversations with passionate change makers and creators that bravely dreamed of new ways, and they took massive action to do it. So in the last few months, really, and I think it goes without saying, it's been a year since many of us have locked down. And so we are in a very different time. And I think about this quote quite a bit the last few months by Maxine Hong Kingston. And it reads, "In a time of destruction, create something." So we are in the midst of this long stretch of the unknown. And often when we think about the unknown, we think about uncertainty. And we are taught and we're programmed to fear that. What I want to invite you to think about is we don't have to see it from a place of fear, but instead I'd like to offer that it's a place of possibility. There are infinite possibilities when we don't know what's next. And because of that, to embrace ourselves as powerful, creative beings that can and we have birthed different ways that honor the dignity and wholeness of each person, living thing in our planet. And so despite the chaos that we are seeing and experiencing around us, a radical and liberated future is possible. A new earth can be realized, and we can create new and better systems and new ways of being, but it's only if we choose to take brave steps. So I invite you today to explore with me what that could look like. And as I said, I'm so excited that my first interviewee is a dear, dear friend and longtime colleague. As we were prepping for this call, I was thinking, when did I first meet Joseph? And I think it was around 2010, and we were just reflecting, wow, what a decade it has been. More than a decade now, actually. And we have evolved and changed in many ways. This is the next iteration of us. When we first met each other, we were both in very, very different places, right, Joseph? So Joseph Santos-Lyons, dear brother, is a biracial Asian American, of Chinese and Czech background. He's an organizer and a minister, and he's currently based right now in Antipolo City, Philippines. And he has a background serving youth and in adult ministry, but he was also formerly, just like me, we used to be part of the nonprofits. He used to actually lead a group out in Oregon called Apano. But now he's in a very different role, which he's going to talk a little bit more about in more detail. But he actually co-created what I think is an incredible manifestation of this idea of new ways. So it's a new center in Southeast Asia, specifically based in the Philippines, called the Center for Organizing, Renewal, and Leadership. So with that, I wanted to turn it over to Joseph. If you could tell us a little bit more about who you are beyond what I included in this intro. So Joseph.
Thank you so much, Noilyn. Hello, hello. It's so good to see you, sister. This is such an exciting moment to sort of connect and just to be able to create, more spaciousness around sort of how we move through the world, especially during this pandemic. I'm also a parent of 3. Our sort of eldest is already into college in Oregon, and we miss him. And then we have 2 daughters here with us in the Philippines. And I think also a big part of my identity is wrapped up in being a partner. My sort of, co-conspirator in all amazing things, Amy Santos-Lyons, who's been an organizer and a feminist activist, and now works in gender sort of issues here in Southeast Asia. She sends her love, and yeah, the only other maybe big piece that influenced me as a young person was music. That was the experience that unlocked a lot of my passion, a lot of my sense of the possible. I was very much a shy kid who stuttered a lot as sort of a child, and it was the spaces of playing music, of playing piano and saxophone and clarinet, and being in those groups, being in band, being in orchestra, where I really felt like I could express myself most fully. And so grateful for music today, especially during this pandemic, playing the guitar, playing the piano, finding ways to listen to good music. Thankful to the artists and the cultural workers and the performers who help us make sense of these times.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel that in a lot of ways, most especially because I think this is something that a lot of people actually don't know. I used to have a really bad stuttering problem too when I was a child. So to be able to find different ways of expression, I think are huge for folks. And we see it now. So talking about ways of expression, you actually shared with me this quote, and it really touched me in a lot of ways. And I wanted to read it because I feel like it symbolizes a lot about what you're hoping to create through choral. And it's by Mickey Scott Bay Jones. And the quote goes, "Together we will create brave space because there is no such thing as safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we all have caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together. And we will work on it side by side." Yeah.
I love hearing Mickey Scott Bay share these words. It's like a prayer and an anthem, and sort of the grounding mantra of what we're trying to build here. And I have to give credit to Apano and the sort of reproductive justice and gender justice organizers in Oregon who brought this reading forward through a lot of our efforts as people of color working on reproductive health and women's issues in Oregon, that I was honored to be a part of. And this is, definitely one of these pieces that defines both, I think, the scope and the kind of energy we want to bring, which is to definitely be, challenging ourselves and having these spaces where we can grow, but also meeting people where they're at, and offering a space that can be both healing and a place where people can find their inspiration, right? To find their courage, to feel like it's a space where they're going to be both taken care of and asked really critical questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And we have a treat because Joseph is going to show us coral. So talk to us before you go. Talk to us a little bit about this concept and what your vision is.
So the Center for Organizing, Renewal, and Leadership is one part of this place that we have built here in Antipolo City. We're in the foothills outside of Metro Manila. It's this last greenway before you get to the city, to the urban city. So we're just on the very, very edge of one of the biggest metropolitan places on earth. We're in the foothills of the Sierra Madre Mountains, which is this mountain range that runs from the southern part of Luzon to the northern part. So we're in the northern, sort of more Tagalog speaking area. And this is where my wife grew up, Amy. She grew up in Quezon City. And for years, we had envisioned coming back to the Philippines. My partner grew up here, but I grew up in the States. And after 15 years of doing organizing and ministry in the US together, we finally began the move in 2016. And it was a long move for us. And as we were thinking about our long-term home here, we wanted to create community. We wanted to continue to create community the way we have been able to do in the US. And also to be able to connect cross-culturally, which was a big part of my experience at Apano and other sort of, community-based programs, was to really meet and get to know people cross-culturally. So the first phase for us was actually finding and connecting with two other close friends to build a co-housing. And these were folks, one who Amy, my partner, had worked with in her 20s as a young organizer working with women and girls here in Quezon City in urban poor communities. And the other was a newer colleague who she had met when she had first moved back here in 2016. And they were working on a lot of humanitarian issues in response to the typhoons and some of the conflicts that are happening here in the Philippines. And so together with these two other incredible families, we were able to conceptualize and begin to think about the sort of the reality of building a place together. So we built this co-housing where we all live in a community together. And as we were doing the designs, we thought about what does it mean to create a little bit bigger of a space so we can also put our values and mission into action in terms of wanting to support other organizers, wanting to be a place where people can come and both like heal and recover. My partner's been involved in a lot of efforts to support folks who are going through reproductive loss or who are need sort of a place to heal from maybe a medical condition, but need a more sort of holistic place where they can sort of rest and sort of recover. We actually just had an incredible young man stay with us for a week who had a recent diagnosis with HIV here. And, just the kind of like stress that you go through when you experience that, we want to be able to offer a safe and a brave space for folks where they can settle and they can clarify and they can eat healthy food. So with all these dreams, we stretched ourselves. We not only built our family sort of studios where the families live in our sort of bedrooms and whatnot, but we decided to sort of design and build a larger sort of dining kitchen and to build a community room and sort of a multi-purpose room into our ground floor and to have a larger sort of backyard area where we can convene folks in a fire circle and a roof deck. And so we began to think about what would be the more accessible and sort of public spaces that we could then entertain and program and host in. So it has been, both huge dreams and then a lot of really detailed having to, work within our budget, work within design, but it's been, one of the most incredible journeys that I've been on. I think in my life, like having children and building this place, are sort of up there as sort of the really incredible moments where I feel very, very humbled and very, very honored.
Yeah. I am curious because you had an opportunity to build a house. What was the catalyst that you all decided we actually want to live, not just with our own immediate family, but we're intentionally going to create a community with other families? And then not just that, right? So you have other families that are living with you in this co-housing space, but you are creating a community space where you live. And I know that you all had this vision before this pandemic happened. And I think in some ways it's so interesting because a lot of people are thinking about that. The places that we live in are now the places that we work in, but you've taken it a step further and even thought about these are also the places that we can be in community with. So I'm just curious again, like what was the catalyst and moving in that direction as opposed to just building, your own single family home?
Yeah, I mean, I am adopted, and I grew up in a community where I often didn't feel like I belonged. And I felt a lot of isolation and a lot of, my parents who adopted me were amazing. They were loving. And it often felt like we were this very nuclear family. And both music and then later Unitarian Universalist Church were the places for me that opened my eyes to the power of community. And in many ways, that is, central to my ministry, which is the forging of places where people can feel like they belong and they can really connect as deeply and as intentionally as possible. My partner, Amy, grew up in a huge family. And she's the oldest, and her folks are the oldest. So there's very much this matriarch, patriarch energy of sort of, let's bring folks together. And her family has this really unique character. Like they have been the safe haven for Amy's siblings and Amy's friends, what they called their barcada, for decades. Like her mother was cooking food for the masses, during the Marcos dictatorship and after the EDSA revolution here, for all the art and theater folks that Amy was connected to. And so both Amy and I really, when we got together as partners 20 years ago, we really found a lot of common cause around the community work that we were doing. And we've always integrated that into our relationship. We often say the family that organizes together stays together. And so, the building of this space was something that we had been testing with family and friends for years. Like, sort of wondering like, well, what does it look like to age in place? Like, what kind of place do we want to live in for the last part of our lives? Who do we want to be able to be close to and connected to? And, I think our dream has been to be a hub for our families. And, in the end, the folks who really said yes and had the capacity to be able to pitch in together with these two very wonderful close friends, who, we were really all bonded by both the brave poem that you read. They have a sort of a very strong feminist sort of approach to how they both work and live in the world. And that's something that I follow in many ways as the sort of one of the male identified folks here in this collective. Our collective Balai Diwata, which means sort of loosely House of Spirits.
I love that.
Yeah, Balai Diwata.
Yes.
So Diwata are actually these like feminist sort of sprites, and we have sort of these little features that we're adding to the place to sort of honor sort of the goddess and the feminine and the feminist sort of energy and sort of spirits here. So but you asked this question about living and working in the same place. And this is something that we haven't fully been able to lean into yet. I think we have some ideas, but this is also where there's tension. Like there's a lot of potential, for challenges, because one is the pandemic. So we're all together all the time. We're sort of, staying in place here. And so hosting anything feels at times challenging because, there's already sort of so much sort of all of us being around. Like so Amy's work from home, like we're all work from, the kids are here at sort of home. So I think our dream is that we are really open, particularly during the week, and that we're hosting sort of day retreats, team retreats. And if we have an overnight guest, it's just one or two folks who are staying in our guest room that I'll show you in a minute. That from time to time we'll do sort of weekend or evening activities, especially like around our roof deck and our fire circle. We would love to host like a coffee house each month, be able to have, folks over to both hear sort of like the incredible local artists here and musicians, especially women sort of musicians, and to be sort of a place and a venue where they can connect and folks can connect. And then, whatever other kind of events folks would like to host here. Already in the 4 months, we've had maybe a dozen small events, and it's everything from like a small staff retreat to sort of individual sort of like healing or writing workshop that folks want to do here on their own. But it's still too soon to tell. And sort of given how the pandemic is unfolding, sort of somewhat, the Philippines doesn't really have a vaccine plan for the people. We're looking at another 6 to 12 months, I think, until we're fully able to move around and fully host folks here at Coral.
Yeah. Well, I think it's definitely making me think about how we see family, how we define family, and how we define community, and how we define space. Like it's so layered in that way. Before we go too into it, because I could see us like just really getting into the conversation, I would love to take a little bit of a pause because I know that you are going to show us the space so that we can see how it looks like.
I'm just walking down from my office, but I'll go to the front door to give you a little bit of a look at the outside. Antipolo is this city that's actually outside of Metro Manila. We're in Rizal province. And Amy found this piece of land about 5 years ago, and it's just incredible. We are on the edge of a village where there's no development at all nearby. So our building on the edge of this greenway amidst the Nara trees and the acacia trees and gemelinas. And we have avocado and mango. And we have buildings together, all connected. This is our place, and this is one of the studios, and then the studio and back. And then inside, we really designed it so the first level was the Coral space, the place where folks could really come together and connect. And so you can see we have sort of a grand entryway, sort of a sala, ping pong table. And we're beginning to build a library that we're also making accessible to the community, sort of a free library of social justice literatures. And then in here is our multi-purpose room, where it's its own sort of suite with a bathroom, where we hope folks will come and stay and have sabbatical or have small program and events. And then here's the dining kitchen area. And one of the cool things about this place is we're able to grow a lot of our own food now. And we just started planting last year, so we're beginning to harvest. And we've also connected with several local folks who cook. And so we're able to engage with folks sort of locally who have connections to the farmers, who have connections at the market. And it's been amazing to be able to both support and get to know sort of local folks engaged in sort of catering and cooking, and to be able to offer folks more than sort of, you know, McDonald's and Starbucks, which is often a popular sort of, you know, treat, but we are interested in offering, and I'm a vegetarian, but offering as much organic and healthy foods as we can. And then this is our backyard, where we have this wonderful sort of space to sit around the fire. And, you know, in the future, we envision being able to have sort of music up here on this little mini stage. We have a small soaking pool in the back, so you can rest your bones. Donated this wonderful little trampoline, so the kids have their own personal play area. So I can maybe show you a quick spot of the garden and then go up to the roof deck and we can wrap up. We're composting here. We're doing as much like sort of local, like indigenous native planting as we can. I will say that the papaya and the oregano and these string beans called sitaw and this bottle gourd called upo are growing really incredibly. And we're able to really begin to enjoy like fresh, locally made, locally grown foods. The architecture for this place was done by one of Amy's high school classmates from the Philippine Science High School. His name is Noilyn, who is an indigenous person from the northern part of the Philippines. And so it was really wonderful to work with him and his team. And we had a lot of local workers who helped us build this place here. And we really struggled during the pandemic. You know, we were locked down for 3 months and couldn't build at all. And also had to make some decisions about how to support the workers, because in the Philippines, when folks build a house, they often live on site. And so we had workers locked down here, and you know, we sort of pooled our money to keep paying folks. We brought food. You know, it was definitely a very difficult process to get through to the end. But in the end, we were able to finish the place in about 1.5 years. And then here's the roof deck. And this is looking primarily to the west. So in the distance, you can see the city, and at night, you can see the city lights. And then we have a kitchen up here on the roof deck as well. And one of the parts of the roof deck is we've been painting a mural to loved ones who have been inspiring to us, who have passed away. And this is a living memorial, you could say. It has both folks from the Philippines and folks from the States who have been huge mentors to us. The woman here, Susan Kimpo, lives in this village, passed away last year, was a very close mentor of my wife's. The Kimpo family was very active during martial law, and she was a journalist and a healer herself. And it's really because of her that we are living in this area. She's someone who has mentored and supported my wife, especially during the transition back to the Philippines, and had created a group that we're active in called the Martial Law Chronicles Project that looks at the history, the impact, the continuing influence of the dictatorship here in the Philippines. So that's the quick and dirty tour. You know, the place is built mostly of concrete, which is so interesting. And we did our best to collect some secondhand wood. So we were able, and some old bamboo. So we were able to do some sort of Filipiniana in the space. But we're still sort of unboxing a bit, like finding our old bunny sort of mats and, collecting things that have been in boxes for years and years. This little floor here is Amy's and our sort of family floor, in our kids' bedrooms here. And I don't know if I really showed a good view, but the two studios are on the other side of the house. And I didn't show the pocket garden, but this is the connection between all three units. See the yellow doors there? That goes to Jing's house and then Clem's house. So we, they have their own kitchens as well, but we often come here and have family dinner together.
I love it. I just want to read a quick comment that somebody put, and I have to echo this. What an incredibly beautiful space you've created with such intention. Yeah, it's so,
thank you.
It's so beautiful.
I would say building a place was never on my sort of list of what I thought I would do in my lifetime. I feel like my generation, especially in the States, we don't think about building our own house. If we're lucky, we'll even buy a house. So once we got into the sort of the commitment to build this place, both, I think, scraping our savings account and borrowing, selling things to sort of, pool the resources, we were just so open for feedback. And there are huge parts of this place that have been totally transformed from a conversation. Like the serendipity of just sort of sharing our plans or talking it through or saying what was on our mind or what we were struggling with, and having someone say, had you thought about this? Or here's an idea that you might consider. And so a huge shout out, especially to Apano folks, because just before I left Oregon, Apano was building its own sort of community center and affordable housing on 82nd Avenue in East Portland, where our offices were. And, it was a blessing to be able to connect with sort of other Asian Pacific Islander architects and designers who helped us with that place and drew some of their inspiration here for the place that we were building. Everything from just thinking really sort of clearly about being accessible to the movement and the use of space, and the ability for us to have some private family space, but really to maximize these sort of public areas where we can officially host folks.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, because I remember there was a story that you shared as this place was being built. It was about the fence and whether a fence should be up. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so man, the Philippines, they love, especially in the city, and some of this might also be the effects of the dictatorship, but folks, especially the middle class have really significant concrete fences, often with barbed wire and broken glass on top. And they're very imposing. There's that sort of culture, I think, even extends out here into these, we're in a sort of a semi-rural area. And I think for like reasons of both being like a place that really feels like a retreat and not like a fortress, but also because we had a really explicit conversation about safety, we decided to not build a massive fencing system here. And so I can sort of show you outside my little window here. We have essentially like, lights and wire fence that's very low around most of the property. And we have planted a lot of things. So there is a setback of sort of bamboo and bougainvillea, which has like some thorns on it. So, we are creating a little bit of a separation, but more of a living barrier. And, we have other like aspects that make us feel safe. Like we do have a CCTV system. We have a new dog who is sort of our early alert system. But we're also just like clear about that, like we're here, like someone's pretty much going to be here sort of 24/7. And I think we haven't gone back to sort of the normal sort of work and travel yet. But when we do, I think our thought is to, be able to have someone in the place. And that is one of the benefits of living with other families, is that you can sort of coordinate. And so all those things allowed us to sort of like, sort of step back from saying, we're not going to build an 8-foot fence. We're not going to, make it seem really imposing and gated. We're already in a gated community, sort of. It's not super hard border compared to some of the subdivisions here, but there is a security guard when you come into the village. They will check your ID. So all these different layers made us feel like, we should definitely not build this humongous fence. Plus, fences are expensive. Concrete walls and all these things. I'm like, let's just plant a lot of really amazing stuff. And it might take us a couple years for it to really fill in, but we're going to have some sweet, bamboo and bougainvillea, which is this beautiful sort of like tropical vine that grows and blossoms so nicely.
Yeah. And I just remember the conversation about you brought up safety and about accessibility and thinking about those things. And what struck me in the conversation that we were part of previously was this idea of, well, what are fences for? And in some ways, safety is in knowing your community, is to be engaged in your community, is to build those relationships and that trust. And so I just think it's so symbolic in so many ways, and that the things that you have chosen to are from nature, to just delineate. To me, it's more like just delineating that this is where our home is, this is where our family is. But it's not a way to like keep folks that don't live there, out.
Yeah. And we live on a edge of the subdivision where there is a large informal settler community, which there are hundreds of them around Metro Manila, where basically urban poor or folks from the rural areas have moved to the city, and they are basically squatters who are living in often communities for 20, 30, 40 years. So we live right up against one of these urban poor communities. And we actually have some of our workers have come from that community. And there's not a hard barrier at the edge of the village into the urban poor community, which is called Daang Bakal. And this area, because there were no houses before our house, was also sort of like their hangout. Like youth will come up here after school and they'll play. Sometimes you'll see young adults up here, sometimes drinking and hanging around. So we've had to really, I think, negotiate with folks. Like we wanted to be both neighborly, and we didn't want to be, the kind of neighbors that were like complaining all the time to the security guard about these kinds of incursions into the village. And so we've also had to contend with a lot of sort of anti-poor sentiments here. I think that there is there is a class caste system in the Philippines. So we've made it a point to get to know the young people who come up. They know our dog. Sometimes they'll come and they'll play with our dog in the street. We've offered them, some of the youth have done some like help around the yard, or like they picked up trash or helped us with our windows and collected firewood. And then, so our sort of approach is just, to be kind and to be in relationship with the folks who are here, and seeing that as a protective factor, that, we could be harsh and strict and report everything, but we don't really see the value in that long term. Like it feels like it just creates sort of an energy of animosity and fear. And this is such a beautiful green place. I think people sort of deserve access to these green spaces. So we've had incidences of like school children sort of walking through our subdivision on their way home from urban poor to urban poor community. And part of me thinks that's great. I'm like, we should be open to pedestrians and bicyclists through here. And so we're really, I think, actively promoting like, hey, let's have new village rules that allow people to utilize this space, because the Metro Manila is notorious for being sort of a concrete jungle. And, you know, to get fresh air, to get sort of green open spaces, to access public parks, these things all cost money. Like, you cannot really live the kind of life that I experienced in the States without having to pay a premium. And that super sucks, especially if you're urban poor and you're just really living, you know, day to day. Like, a huge contingent of the urban poor populations here in Manila, they're all day laborers. Like, they may work in a factory job, or they may work, you know, as a driver or a tricycle driver, or, you know, buy and sell food, but they're really living day to day. And so one of our connections through the church is that we have a small ministry in an urban poor community, and we've hosted a couple of the youth from that, from Taguig City, which is one of these sort of big sort of urban cities in Metro Manila. And some folks have never even been outdoors. It's that same experience I think we see in the States, where sometimes sort of urban youth often don't have the opportunity to ever go out to the mountains, to the beach. And I think that people need to be able to put themselves in the way of beauty. Like, I think they need to be able to feel that connection, to feel human.
Yeah. And a lot of what you said really resonates and touches me in a deep way as an energy healer, because nature is so healing. And you were saying, like, the energetics that we're putting out, we don't want to create separation in many ways, and the power of being in nature and how healing that is, and this space that you're trying to create is a healing space. I mean, there's even research studies talking about forest bathing and what that could do to a person, right? So we could expose folks more to air, to water, to land, and just being able to have that connection, because I think that's something that we've actually lost. You know, whether you want to call it the advancement of technology or capitalism or the urbanization, right? We have actually lost that disconnection to the lands that we're on, and to have reverence for it and the healing properties of it. So I just think it's just so beautiful. I did want to uplift that, of this vision that you have. You also brought up another point that I think is really interesting. You and your wife have done organizing in the States, and you're active in communities in the Philippines, and to some degree also in Southeast Asia. What would you say are the similarities and the differences in the way that people do social justice work in the US and in other parts of the country, but more specifically your work in the Philippines? And what can we learn here in the US?
Yeah. There are much older, much more militant, mass-based organizing efforts in Asia than I have ever known in the US. That there are folks who have had to choose to be on the edge of being underground or not. And so the idea of safe space, of personal safety, of personal livelihood, people are risking that all the time here. It is, you know, an ingrained way of life when you live under a dictatorship or an authoritarian regime. And so that, I think, you know, in part broadens like the diversity of folks engaged in political work. That you know, I think there is a strong sort of consciousness here of both sort of economics and imperialism and colonialism. And then people here are finely tuned to what's happening around the world, especially in the US and in Europe and the Middle East, where many Filipinos work and live abroad. And, you know, I a taste of that as an Asian American in the States, in my own community, and then through Apano and other groups. But here it is like the calendar year, the liturgical year is built around, overseas workers coming home, around family sending their balikbayan boxes with gifts and pasalubong for the family, around major anniversaries and reunions when their families can come back together and see one another, or they travel to the States and to Europe. And so there is, I think, this sort of critical awareness of the need to have these strong connections and bridges between sort of communities. And I'll admit, like, I grew up in the US and I was pretty politically and socially active. And I didn't know barely anything about social movements anywhere else in the world. And I sort of had this sort of theory that, like, if I could just make change in the US, everything would be fine, right? Because we're the engine of so much destruction and devastation. So if I can change the American sort of society, that's good for everyone. And part of that is true, but it's also, how do we change it, that I think my eyes are opening here. It's like there's so much that I just don't know about what would satisfy folks here. Like, what I think they might need is not what they might self-determine that they need. So there is just like the organizer 101 of like having one-on-one conversations, really sort of, listening to folks where they're at. It has been, I've had to do that all over again here. And to learn the landscape and to learn the nuances, and also the competing interests that exist here, because the colonialism is very internalized as well. It's like the culture of the Philippines and other places in Asia, it is orientated towards whiteness. You'll see an entire aisle at the grocery store that sells whitening creams and other beauty products. Like, you don't see that in the US. It is like billboards and, actors and sort of movie stars all promoting this sort of, close proximity to sort of the European and American whiteness. And so that stuff, I think does get internalized, everything down to like, dating people, just the same way there's colorism in the US. There's a lot of these internalized things. And so, there's still this work to do, and still the questions to be asked, and a new way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a really good point around the colonial mind and this work that a lot of people are doing around decolonization on all levels, right? But to understand it from a global context, I think adds a different layer for me personally of understanding how to do movement work here in the US. Because I think in America, we are pretty self-centered. We think that everything is, the world revolves around us. Yes and no, right? But we also have like such little knowledge of the interplay of our own country in other countries, right? And like you were just saying, like, just on all levels of even how in another place that's not the US, just the impact of colonization or imperialism has on the psyche of a people.
Yeah.
And how does that play out?
And the case for reparations, I think, takes on a new meaning for me,
Yes.
because we've taken every resource, including the people of places like the Philippines, to build places like America. And I think I've known that intellectually, but to see how that affects, people on like a spiritual and an emotional level, even within my relatively more middle class sort of network of folks who have education, folks who maybe have a professional job, there is still a desire to live and work overseas. Like, there's a pull to leave the Philippines. And I have never experienced that in the States. Not on the scale that I experience here. I have a close sort of friend who is, a doctor, and works in public health and is very like in a prestigious position and is already, oops, my internet, is sort of thinking about, you know, spending time abroad. Sometimes it's for education, which can make sense. The educational opportunities abroad are substantial and important, and that is a great way I think folks can bring back. And you know, so that is, you know, Amy's family, they identify sort of as Katipunan, which is like freedom fighter folks. They're the Filipinos who are like nationalist, like let's build the Philippines, let's come back. Her parents never left, even despite all of her uncles and aunts moving to Canada and the US. And so Amy always had this spirit of, you know, I'm in the States, but I'm going to come back to the Philippines. And it did, I will say, take me a decade to really accept what that really meant. Like for me, of course, uprooting and leaving, you know, my known home and community, but to also now experience a little bit of what she experienced in the States, which is being totally new and not, you know, making so many mistakes and feeling like at times inferior and, you know, questioning my own judgment and needing to relearn how to engage with folks and how to have patience and how to be listening and asking the questions.
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely that. This is a time of learning, unlearning, and relearning in many respects. I wanted to talk a little bit about your role as a minister, but in particular this area. So, you know, a lot of what you do as a minister, and I'm saying this as somebody who has relatives who serve in the ministry, right? You hold a very specific role in the community, and you're often one of the people that folks turn to during very turbulent times in their life, whether it's a pandemic or not, you know? So you hold that very, very special role. And what I have been seeing a lot lately is there's been more and more talks, and you kind of alluded it, you alluded to it earlier, around the spirituality piece and understanding social justice work, but sometimes it like they operate in very like distinct silos. But I am seeing a little bit of like this convergence of traditions, spirituality, whatever you want to name, religion and movement work. What particular role do you see yourself having? And I'm asking this because I'm also thinking about Deepa Iyer had a piece a few years ago, and she like resurrected it right last year, is what is your role in social change work? So having all of these hats, and it's not right either or, it's all, it could be and or it could be this for this particular time.
Yeah.
What unique role do you think that you play right now?
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about how the minister is one of the last generalist positions, the generalist roles or professions in the world, in a world of more specialization. And so I do see a big part of my role to be a resource for folks and to be working at the in-between, in those gaps where there is uncertainty, but as you said, there's possibility. You know, because I'm more engaged as a community minister, not with a direct parish or congregation full-time, you know, I am paying attention to these intersections, those crossroads where maybe things are rubbing up against each other and there needs some ritual or some blessing or even some cursing can come from me or from the community in some ways. I mean, the pandemic has definitely been a time of great grief and great loss, and that has called me into action in ways that, you know, no one wants to go, to be part of funerals, to be in hospitals. and there's a big part of the ministry that is also hands-on, like here's a referral, here's someone you can call to get a sack of rice, here's, you know, here's a place you can stay, you know, if you're experiencing domestic violence during the pandemic. So there is definitely an sort of paying attention to those sort of social sort of issues that are going on. You know, longer term, my hope is to be both a spiritual resource, so through spiritual direction, through the hosting of retreats, through collaboration with other groups. You know, when folks come here and they are utilizing our space, they're often consulting with us, or folks who live here, about what programs or opportunities would be helpful to folks. And it could be as simple as taking folks on a guided hike, sort of talking through our garden, like introducing young people to, you know, local fruits and vegetables. You know, there are so many disconnections that we experience, I think, as humans today. And plus we're plugged in, and I am also plugged into the internet a lot, that, you know, I think we want to be a place where, you know, folks can look up and look around, sit by the fire, you know, share, you know, good food and drink, and to have that place of sort of deep dialogue and conversation. So sometimes I'm thinking about what are the prompting questions that we should be asking. And for example, right now, one of them is around Myanmar and the coup in Myanmar. And we had a convening last year before the pandemic of a lot of sort of social democrats, and it included Myanmar, Indonesia, Philippines. And we met a lot of these activists. You know, Myanmar is just, you know, close to the Philippines. It's like, you know, California to Texas. And so this is our region. Like, we want to be facilitating and fostering these kinds of connections. And we were able to be a part of a conversation on the religious dimensions of protests in Myanmar, because religion plays a much different role in these countries than I've ever experienced in the States. I mean, these are not necessarily pluralistic sort of countries. Like the Philippines is a dominant Catholic sort of culture, especially in the north. It is Muslim in the south. But you have sort of these right-wing Buddhists in Myanmar who are sort of on the one hand backing the military coup, but then you have this incredible array, actually a more pluralistic mix of folks with different religious backgrounds who are part of the opposition, who are part of the NDL in Myanmar. And so just learning these nuances, I think are, I don't know, just, they are teaching points for how I would relate even back in the US. Yeah. Like the assumptions, I think that is probably the biggest sort of decolonizing thing, is just to really check assumptions and critique my own sort of outlook. And, you know, yes, I want to be fierce and have opinions and, like, you know, contribute to a conversation. And I find myself, instead of the 80-20, sort of the organizer listens and the, you know, 80% and talks 20%, it's like 90-10 here, or 95-5. And doing what I can to pick up, you know, the local news, local literature, local poetry, to sort of, you know, hear what, you know, folks are really saying.
Yeah, I love that. There's so many lessons. I'm going to be rounding it out because we're coming up to the top of the hour, but I did want to ask you this, you know, again, as your role as a minister, you hold space for so many people. How are you being held at this time? Because I think that's also important, not just as a minister, but for so many of folks that I know that are in my network, that especially that do advocacy work or that do social service, direct service work, they are always in service of someone else. And especially during the time, they're being called to rise and elevate in many ways, even beyond their own capacity, but they show up, they still do it. So I think that there is some lesson there too. So in what ways are you being held or want to be held at this time?
Thank you. It's a really deep question. there are definitely moments I feel super overextended and feel emotional about it, like, and existential, like wondering, like, who am I now? What is my purpose? I think one of the things I've stepped into or moved into this year is I've started taking a reevaluation counseling course. It's this peer counseling program that has been teaching me some new ways of engaging with the emotionality of life and being able to articulate sort of needs and hopes and fears. And so, I appreciate that I'm able to be a part of all Asian American, or all Asian, not Asian American, but all Asian. So folks from Myanmar, folks from Singapore, Malaysia, and the Philippines are in this virtual reevaluation counseling fundamentals class that we've started. And so that, from sort of a personal level has felt really supportive. I think the hope of going back to see our son in the States at some point, we were supposed to visit last year, but we canceled because of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And to spend time with friends and family in the Pacific Northwest is also something that keeps me grounded. And then maybe the last thing is sort of every day I spend a little time in the morning and a little time at night with the sunrise and my tomatoes and the sunset and my squash, really just hands in the garden, but also the rising and setting of the sun. And so I, after 3-4 years of living in the city in condos and then being here in this very green sort of, forested area with the sun so present, I'm appreciating that sort of simple connection to the earth and to the cycles of the universe.
Yeah. Medicine in so many ways, in so many forms. I love it. So how can the folks that are tuning in connect with you and with Coral?
Oh. Well, we are just standing up our website, and we have a Facebook, so you can look for us under Center for Organizing, Renewal, and Leadership. And we anticipate, hosting a couple events sort of publicly each quarter. We are actually preparing to have a conversation between Myanmar and Philippine activists around organizing under authoritarianism in response to the coup in Myanmar. So if those are interesting sort of conversation topics for you, sign up and sort of follow us on Facebook, and we have an email list. And if you're ever thinking of coming to Asia and you're coming back to see family, but you'd like to do your own retreat, or you'd like to get some recommendations for other places to go, to even make introductions to be able to support folks, especially with folks who know us or who know you, Noilyn, and are just looking for that kind of relationship. We're happy to help be a guide for folks. Actually, just last week, there's a old friend from Oregon who moved to Toronto, and she met a Filipino in Toronto who moved back to the Philippines. And she just introduced us. He lives in Cavite, a little south of here. And he just reached out and was like, hey, I just, our mutual friend introduced us and I'd love to connect. And it turns out he knows people we know. He was in the underground during martial law. So we've already begun to talk about just getting together for a dinner, and those kinds of informal connections, I think, are, for us, the foundation of Coral. We would not have been able to build this without these really genuine, authentic relationships that we have been building over the years. Yes, we saved some money, but we've also done our best to really preserve and build and maintain these relationships that are at the core of all that we do.
Yeah, and it's right there. I think it's a beautiful way for us to almost wrap up, because I do have one more question, but this idea of just connection, right? Even across the ocean, we have these connections to each other. So to bring it back to the series title, which is Unlock Your Inner Creator, what does being a creator, or what does creator mean to you, Joseph?
I mean, for me, it's about leaning in to being generative, being an edge walker. So walking along the edge of the known and the unknown. It's at times being uncomfortable and being frustrated and feeling like, for us, like the pressure of deadlines and money, but also holding that deeper purpose, like having a clear sense of your intentions and the future that you want, and putting things in context. Yeah, and for me, it's a lot about collaboration. I mean, as part of my theology as a Unitarian Universalist, you know, theology ministry, it happens in community. You know, I'm adjusting to this new role of being outside the city and being sort of, you know, minister on the hill that folks can come up to visit. And, you know, I'm going to do my best to reciprocate, right? To reciprocate that sort of outreach and that connection back, and that, you know, giving of time and treasure to support a range of efforts, both here and abroad.
I love it. I love it. Well, I want to do one more thing. We're going to do, and some of the folks who have ever been in any of my leadership trainings or that I coach know that I do this every once in a while. So I have these cards, and, you know, when we think about creation, one of the biggest things that we can think about is the phrase "I am," because there's this universal truth, and when you embody that, so I have "I am" affirmation cards. So let's do this. I'm gonna fan it out, and I'm just gonna take my hand, and you're gonna tell me what to stop on, and that's gonna be our closing thought.
Okay, stop.
Stop. Okay, what did I land on? Ooh, this is a good one. Okay. So I am passionate. I put my entire heart into the people and the things I believe in. My passion is a powerful force. It is an external fuel. I recognize the strength of my passion, and therefore I am careful where I choose to focus it. I am passionate. So appropriate. It always is. So thank you so much, Joseph, for your time, for your energy, for your wisdom. And I will have his information up. So if you want to connect with Joseph directly, you can. And I want to thank everybody for being here as we launch this series. And I'm looking forward to continued conversation. So stay tuned, everyone. Thanks. Good night, good morning, good afternoon, whenever you're tuning in. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation and you'd like to help support this interview series, make sure to tune in to the next episode and share it with others. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram at The Radiant You, U as in the letter U, and sign up for my newsletter by visiting www.theradiantu.com. Again, that's theradiantu.com. Thanks, everyone, and remember, dream big, dream bold, and take brave steps. I'll see you next time.